the Stranger Things scene that grossed out Millie Bobby Brown. You know that with Stranger Things Season 4 in the books, a lot of people have been thinking about their favorite scenes from the spooky sci-fi series. Whether gut-busting guitar solos or the first time they saw the Demogorgon, people are reminiscing about the scenes that really got them excited, laughing, or completely terrified. Millie Bobby Brown, who plays the superpowered 11, has grown up acting in scenes that would turn most children's blood cold. But what is the Stranger Things scene that grossed MBB out the most? Let's take a look at some of the scariest scenes and find out which one even she wasn't prepared for. Chrissy getting crushed. The first really freaky moment in the 4th season came in the premiere episode, The Hellfire Club, which ended with a visceral and intense cliffhanger. In the episode, the cheerleader cutie Chrissy has been plagued by visions about her verbally abrasive mother for several days and ends up trying to buy some ketamine, that's horse tranquilizer, from headbanger Eddie. Unfortunately, while Eddie is trying to get together the drugs for her, she falls into yet another vision, this time with a brutal outcome. She sees her mother at a sewing machine, but her face is warped, looking a little like what we understand to be Vecna. As she tries to escape, she looks for her dad, only to see his eyes and mouth sewn harshly shut and leaking with blood and other stuff. Eventually, Vecna squelches threateningly over to her and tells her not to cry, saying, "It's time for your suffering to end." As his long fingers reach out to her face, she's pinned to the ceiling, in reality floating. Her arms and legs are broken and she's folded in on herself, snapped and scrunched. When the image is too much to watch, her eyes implode inward. Unlike previous Stranger Things deaths, this one looked straight out of a Saw movie, albeit with magic. Chilling. Creel's Chronicle. In the 4th episode of the season, we get a freaky story of a more traditional haunting. Mental hospital patient Robert Englund, played by Freddy Krueger actor Robert Englund, is apparently a murderer. Nancy and Robin interview him in an obvious reference to The Silence of the Lambs and listen to the eyeless patient's gruesome story. His tale features almost every disturbing thing you can imagine, as the Creel family's dream home plays host to faucet spiders, tortured and mutilated animals, and a baby in a fireplace. All pretty horrifying and demonic. In a surprising twist, though, we learn as the radio plays Dream a Little Dream of Me by itself, and Mrs. Creel gets the Chrissy Vecna treatment that Victor was a former military man, as he is trapped in the nightmare of himself shelling a civilian residence in France. That's the origin story of the baby in the fireplace. The story ends with Victor locked away, cutting out his own eyes with a razor blade to make the images go away. That would gross out most, but it's still not MBB's most horrifying scene. Demo bats everywhere. A lot of people didn't find the supernatural demo bats too scary, mostly because they're pretty cool if you're into horror. Still, their introduction is pretty chilling. Steve explores a door to the Upside Down that is based in the middle of a dark and chilly lake. He's suddenly ripped from this world into the Upside Down by a tentacle, and once looking around, he sees a new area of the nightmarish realm. It's empty and vast, but pulsing with lights. Next, we hear this scratching sound that no one wants to hear, and then just as some figures appear in the sky, he's knocked down by a slippery tail. Suddenly, he's being attacked by dozens of the supernatural rodents, tri-tailed and possessing sharp, terrifying fangs. They bite him and strangle him as he tries desperately just to survive. And that's how we leave him, fighting for his life as the episode draws to a close. Now we have to keep watching. Vecna's creation. In an episode that finally began to answer some of the questions that Stranger Things fans have had for years, the massacre at Hawkins' lab actually turns the season's opening sequence on its head. 11, played of course by Millie Bobby Brown, is in an immersion tank at the lab and finally unlocks her true memory about the circumstances of her escape. It's revealed that number 1, who was disguised as a kindly orderly, was actually the one who slaughtered all the other kids in the experiment. 11 proceeds down the hallway, witnessing the bloodbath. The kids are all twisted and broken, flung across their beds and drenched in blood. We're not in season 1 anymore. Finally, 11 finds 1, and he's holding one kid against the wall with his powers, and the boy's eyes are rolled back while blood pours from his eye sockets. 1 tells 11 that he wanted her to wait and attempts to explain himself, explaining his understanding of her loneliness. He wipes one of her tears away from her face, but in a manner that seems more like he actually wants it for himself than as if he's trying to relate. Of course, we know that Vecna uses a person's negative emotions against them with his powers, and that's a big indicator. It's a pretty horrifying scene that explains a lot of the details of how things came to be the way they are in Hawkins, but was it the scene that most terrified Millie Bobby Brown? Actually, no. It's pretty close, but for that, we need to go to something that's actually a bit more obvious. Vecna's face. As he played number 1, so too does Jamie Campbell Bower play Vecna, as of course they are one and the same. Of course, they look nothing alike, which means Bower had to undergo the requisite 8 hours in makeup every day to shoot the scenes of Vecna, while lesser studios, we're looking at you Disney Marvel, would just CGI the costume onto the character. Stranger Things creators, the Duffers, clearly wanted a more visceral, real look, like the movies of the 80s, of course. What was created was this huge, undead humanoid creature Vecna. Formerly Game of Thrones prosthetics master Barry Gower created a sinewy, fleshy, veiny look for Bower to wear, and the resultant perfect mess of cartilage and mutilation was so effective that it actually made Millie Bobby Brown cry the first time she saw him. Finally, in possession of her powers again, Eleven comes face to face with Vecna in a battle that requires a lot of mental athletics. Vecna blinds Elle with his vines, taking her powers for a moment, and at this point, Vecna approaches Eleven to converse with her close-up style. Apparently, Millie Bobby Brown was not really expecting to end up so close to such a realistic-looking horror, and as she's still relatively young, she found his appearance to be overwhelming and far too much for her to handle. In an interview with Variety, Jamie Campbell Brown mentioned that MBB was disgusted by the appearance of Vecna. He said, "They brought her up into a position where she's bound. I walked up to her, of course in full Vecna makeup, and she burst into tears. She wouldn't look at me, and she was visibly just disgusted by the whole thing." However, there's another twist that might make you wonder what kind of production the Duffer Brothers are running here, because clearly Millie Bobby Brown didn't know that it was Bower underneath. It's obvious that Vecna is a terrifying, dark mage who will go to incredible extremes to get what he wants, and the transformation from number 1 to Vecna is like night and day visually. But for whatever reason, Millie Bobby Brown had no idea that it was Bower playing Vecna. She must surely have assumed it was another actor, perhaps someone she didn't know, which would make believing Vecna's horrifying visage all the more likely, but still, she had a gut reaction to the monster and cried. That was until something unexpected happened that gave away the whole thing and allowed her to calm down. Despite her horror at facing Vecna in the artificial flesh, it turned out to be Jamie Campbell Bower's smoking habit that gave him away. Bower said, "After she cried and I made it obvious that she knew it was me, one of the things she said was that I knew it was you when I could smell cigarettes, because I'm a smoker. It's amusing that after 8 hours in makeup, 25 pieces of latex and silicone being glued to his body using medical adhesive, and all of his acting skill, it was his breath that gave Bower away." Imagine what would have happened if he'd had some gum or a mint before filming. So that was the scene that most grossed out and terrified Millie Bobby Brown. But what do you think?